Hello, it's Tuesday the 15th of September 2020. I'm in the town of Saint-Hubert in Belgium, and tomorrow I'm cycling northwards and I'm going to spend 2 weeks cycling to the Belgian coast and the town of Ostend. Wednesday the 16th of September, I'm spending a couple of days cycling to Namur. I'm in the southern half of Belgium at the moment. I think it's Wallonia. It's the region that's very hilly, very forested. And I'm heading towards the northern half of Belgium, or Flanders. And it gets a lot more flatter the further north I go. So it should be, once I get past Brussels, I think it's going to be a very nice cycling country. It's going to be very flat and lots of cycle routes everywhere. Just arrived in Dinant, where I'm just spending the night at an Airbnb and then carrying on to Namur. It looks like quite a pretty town actually, but unfortunately I won't have much time to have a look around. Maybe another time. Thursday the 17th of September. Today I'm back on the very well signposted Eurovelo 5 cycle path. I'm following this all the way into Namur. It follows the Meuse Valley. Just arrived in the centre of Namur. I've got a couple of nights here and it's going to be a really nice day tomorrow, so I'm going to look for my Airbnb now and come back here and look around the old town tomorrow. Friday the 18th of September. This morning I'm going to have a look around the old part of Namur. So Namur, I guess it's gained its importance. It's at the confluence of two rivers. So just over there, that's the Meuse River going south and then northwards up to the North Sea. And this is the Saint-Hubert river. And in between the two rivers there's a huge outcrop of rock. And ever since Roman times, there's been military fortifications being built up there. At the moment, there's a citadel which most of it dates back from the 19th century, and you can get some really awesome views of the town from up there. So I'll be going up there later on to get some panoramic views. But first, I'm going to go into the Place d'Armes, which is the main focal point of the old town. This is La Place d'Armes, which is the busiest square in the town, and not far from here are all the historical buildings. There's a belfry tower nearby. I'm just going to go over and have a look at that. So right next to the Place d'Armes is the belfry tower of Nemours. The belfry tower is built upon the foundations of an older 14th century tower which used to be part of the city walls. This is the city cathedral. This is Cathedral Saint-Hubert, which was built between 1751 and 1767. Nemours was the hometown of the artist Félicien Rops, and this is a museum which contains a lot of his work. I'm just going up to the citadel now to get a better look at the city. Saturday the 19th of September. Today I'm cycling to the town of Waterloo, which is about 10 miles south of Brussels. While I'm there, I'd like to visit the battlefield of 1815. In fact, on the way to Waterloo I'll be cycling across the battlefield on the main road to Brussels. So I've booked a couple of nights at Waterloo, Airbnb. So tomorrow I'd like to visit the battlefield. So the events leading up to Waterloo began in 1789 with the French Revolution. And shortly after the revolution, relationships between France and its neighbouring countries started to break down. And that resulted in the French Revolutionary Wars, which began in 1792 and ended in 1802 with the Treaty of Amiens. But that didn't last for long, and in 1803 the Napoleonic Wars started. Now, Napoleon Bonaparte, he was in the French army during the Revolutionary Wars. I think he was in the artillery division, and he quickly worked his way through the ranks. And by 1799, Napoleon became the first consul of France. And then by 1804, he became the Emperor of France. So while he was Emperor, the French, they expanded their empire. They had a lot of success during the Napoleonic Wars. But then in 1812, Napoleon had his disastrous campaign in Russia. And then in 1813, his brother Joseph lost the Battle of Vittoria in Spain, and that cost him the Peninsular War, which was also going on at the time. And then Napoleon lost at the Battle of Leipzig in 1813, and that was disastrous because after that he had to retreat back into France, and the Allies pursued him. The Allies entered Paris on March 1814, and then in April 1814 Napoleon was forced to abdicate, and he was exiled to the island of Elba in the Mediterranean. Following Napoleon's abdication, Louis XVIII was installed as the King of France, but he wasn't a very popular king. And in March 1815, Napoleon decided to leave Elba, and he had about 1,000 troops with him, and he landed back in France at Nice. And he went back to Paris, and the people embraced him, and they made him the emperor again. So the Allies around Europe, at the time, the main Allies were Britain, Austria, Prussia and Russia. And there was also smaller countries involved, I think Sweden, Spain, Portugal. So they decided to get together and form an army called the Seventh Coalition. And they decided to march to France and try and defeat Napoleon for once and for all. So in June 1815, the armies of the coalition start converging onto France. So Napoleon knows that if the coalition armies manage to meet up, they would form a huge army which would easily defeat the French army. So he knows that he's going to have to try and have a battle with the armies before they manage to meet up. So at the time, in what is now modern day Belgium, but back then it was the United Kingdom of the Netherlands, there were two of the main coalition armies. There was the army led by Arthur Wellesley, who was better known as the Duke of Wellington, and he had a mainly British army, and he also had Dutch soldiers and soldiers from German states in his army as well. And he was based in Brussels, and not very far away, I think in the town of Ligny, which is about 30 miles to the south of Brussels, was the Prussian army led by Field Marshal von Blücher. So the armies posing the most immediate threat to Napoleon is Wellington's army, based up in Brussels, and Blücher's army, which is approaching Ligny. So Blücher and Wellington plan to meet up between the two towns, and then they could march into France. However, Napoleon is too quick for them. He invades what is now modern day Belgium at Charleroi, and he sends most of his army to Ligny on the 16th of June. And there they have a large battle with the Prussian army. Also on the 16th of June, he sends a smaller army commanded by Marshal Ney to the small town of Quatre Bras. Now this town is vital for Wellington to travel down to Ligny. So on the 16th of June of 1815, there was a major battle at Ligny between France and Prussia, and a smaller battle at Quatre Bras between the French and Wellington's forces. In both battles, the French managed to push the Allied forces back. But the problem for Napoleon, the Prussians retreat, but they don't retreat to the east. They retreat northwards, so they're still within about a day's march of Wellington's army. Meanwhile, Wellington's army is forced to retreat and he makes a stand at Waterloo. And when Wellington gets to Waterloo, he sends a messenger over to the Prussian army, telling them where he is and requesting reinforcements as soon as possible. So on the 18th of June, the Prussian army start marching towards Waterloo to help reinforce Wellington's army. I'm on the road now that leads from Quatre Bras to Waterloo and then onwards to Brussels. So this is the road that the armies would have taken after the Battle of Quatre Bras. And I'm about a couple of miles from the Waterloo battlefield now. I'm just approaching a building called La Ferme de la Belle Alliance, and it played a role in the battle, and also this is where you first get a view of the battlefield. So this is La Ferme de la Belle Alliance. I'll be having a closer look at it tomorrow, and just north of the building is the battlefield of Waterloo. Sunday the 20th of September, I've arrived back at the southern edge of the battlefield and La Ferme de la Belle Alliance. I think this is the best place to start a tour of the battlefield. So during the battle, Napoleon used La Ferme de la Belle Alliance. This is where he overlooked the battle towards the end of the battle. I think it was used as a field hospital as well. There's a plaque dedicated to the French medical corps on it. And after the battle, this is where it is believed that Wellington and Blucher met to congratulate each other. When I first heard of La Belle Alliance, I assumed it was named after the battle when Blucher and Wellington met here, but it was called La Ferme de la Belle Alliance before the battle. The story is that the owner of the farm died, and the widow married one of the farmhands, and the wedding was known as La Belle Alliance. But there's also another story that this used to be a tavern, and it's a similar story. The publican died and the widow married the new publican. So that's how it got its name, after the wedding they had. So this is the plaque at La Belle Alliance, which is dedicated to the French Medical Corps for their devoted care during the battle. And there's another plaque at La Belle Alliance. It's very difficult to read, but it refers to the meeting of the Generals Wellington and Blucher, who met here after the battle. I'm standing just to the east of La Belle Alliance now, and I'm looking northwards over the battlefield. So I'll try and describe the battlefield as best as I can. It's a very wide, shallow valley running west to east, and about a kilometre away, there was a high ridge. I don't know if I can make it out with the GoPro, but just over there is what's known as the Butte de Lion, and that's the Mound of the Lion, and that was built to commemorate. That's the biggest memorial to the battle, and that is where the centre of Wellington's line was. In 1815, there was a long there's a much higher ridge on the other side of this valley, but when they built the monument, they didn't get the soil from somewhere else, they just used the ridge on the other side. So nowadays it's a lot lower than what it used to be. Now, Wellington had chosen this battlefield with great care. He already knew about it because several months before the battle, he had his army surveyors go around this part of what is now Belgium to make maps of the regions, just in case there was future conflict with France. And he chose the high ridge on the other side of this valley. It made a very good defensive position because his soldiers could, for most parts of the battle, they could stand on the other side of the ridge, so they would be hidden from view from the French, so they would find it difficult to fire artillery at them. And also there are 3 farmhouses. There's one just over on the far right flank of what would be Wellington's lines, called Hougoumont, and in the centre, there's, by the Brussels road, there's another farm called La Haye-Sainte, and just on Wellington's left flank there's another large farm complex called Papelette. So this stick represents Wellington's front line, and these 3 stones are the 3 farmhouses. So that Wellington used the farmhouses as a kind of forward bastions. He put soldiers in each one. So when the French attacked, they would have to go in between the farmhouses, and so they would be fired on 3 sides. So they played a very important role in the defence of the ridge. So on the morning of Sunday the 18th of June 1815, this is where the French army would have been. They would have been positioned all along this south ridge of the valley on both sides of the Brussels road. Now, one major problem for Napoleon was that it was raining all night. The night before the battle, it was just persistent rain, and this turned the battlefield into an absolute bog, and that of course made it very difficult for his army to attack Wellington's lines. So he was forced to wait, and instead of attacking at about 9 o'clock in the morning, he had to wait until about 11 o'clock until he could start the battle. And this was good news for Wellington because he was of course waiting for Blucher's army to reinforce him, so that gave him a bit more time. I'm standing just to the west of La Belle Alliance now, and this is where Napoleon's left flank would have been, stretching all the way over into the distance. And this is where the battle started, because at 11 o'clock approximately, some people say it's about 11:30, Napoleon decided to start the battle by attacking Hougoumont with his infantry. So I'm just going to cycle over to Hougoumont now. I've just arrived at the northern ridge of the battlefield. So this is where Wellington's front line would have been. Back in 1815, another advantage of this ridge, there used to be what they called the sunken lane, and there was, where this road is now, there was a lane that had big steep banks on both sides, and I think there was hedges as well. So that formed another defensive part of the ridge, but unfortunately this was all removed when they built the Lyon. So I'm just going to go down to Hougoumont. this is the south side of Hougoumont. It's quite fortunate that there are still some buildings that survived the battle, because the farm received an absolute pounding from Napoleon's howitzers and most of the buildings were destroyed. But I'm just going to have a closer look now at the farm. All the buildings of the farm were grouped in two large courtyards just on the western side of the farm, and on the eastern side there was a large walled garden. So this wall goes all the way around, and this was used as a defence by the British soldiers. They made a lot of loopholes in the wall. Now there are some holes there. I don't know if they're the original ones or they've been added afterwards, but they made holes along this wall where they could fire the muskets, and they probably had something to stand on so they could fire over the wall as well. So this is what the French would have had to take when they advanced. On the other side, just over on approaching the farm, there used to be a wood here. There was a small wood, which was good and bad for the French. It gave them some sort of cover, but when they came through the wood, they didn't know what to expect. So as soon as they came out in the opening, they were confronted by this heavy musket fire from the farm. All that's surviving now of the wood, there's a live tree there, and there's two dead trees, and they were here during the battle. I was watching a documentary about Hougoumont on YouTube last night. It had the British TV celeb Sean Bean, who's associated with Napoleonic Wars stuff, and they pointed out that in the tree there are actually bullet holes, or the musket ball holes that were fired during the war. So these are actual musket ball holes that were fired from Hougoumont farm. This is the south gate of the farm, and this is the first point which the French army would have tried to get through. So this would have been an absolutely horrific place to be. There was musket fire from all the windows. There may have been soldiers on the roof as well. So there was a constant musket fire as they approached the south gate. And they tried to smash it down with axes, but they were beaten back, so the attack on the south gate failed. So they went around the farm and they tried to attack the farm from the north side. Just by the south gate there's a memorial plaque dedicated to the Coldstream Guards who held the south gate from successive attacks throughout the battle. I think the soldiers that Wellington deployed here were the Coldstream Guards and the Scots Guards, and he also had soldiers from German divisions in the woods, and their job was to open fire on the French before they could attack Hougoumont. So I'm just cycling down now to the north gate of Hougoumont farm. This is the north gate of the farm. So after they failed to take the south gate, the French army came round to this side and they stormed this gate. They had attacked it with axes and they actually eventually got through. This is obviously a modern gate. I think a lot of this has been restored. But this is where the battle could have swung in Napoleon's favour, because if the French had succeeded in getting lots of soldiers through the north gate, they would have taken Hougoumont, and that would have been a decisive blow for Wellington. But they were repelled by the soldiers inside. There was an absolutely bitter fight here, but eventually the French, who managed to get inside the farm, they had to retreat back. But Wellington said that this is one of the most decisive moments of the battle, when the French took the north gate. And just beside the gate is a memorial plaque dedicated to the 2nd Battalion, who defended the farm. This is the far eastern end of the walled garden. I'm not sure if this wall is original. I think a lot of historians aren't really sure what was original and what was rebuilt after the battle. But there are some loopholes here. So these were probably put in after the battle to show what it was like. But these give a good idea of what the holes that the soldiers made. So this is how Hougoumont would have looked in 1815. I'm now in what was the upper courtyard of the farm, and this grassy area here, this is where the main farmhouse used to be, but that was also completely destroyed and burnt down during the battle, and all that survived was the chapel. And this is the south gate. This is where the French army first tried getting into the farm. So again, here there would have been very intense fighting. I don't think we're allowed access into the walled garden, which is a pity. But from here it's possible to make out how large the whole farm was. So this would have been quite a large defensive position for Wellington. The battle at Hougoumont went on throughout the day. The French failed to take the farm. So Napoleon realised around midday that he would have to try different tactics. So around midday he ordered his artillery to open fire on Wellington's centre position, and after the bombardment then he would send in a infantry attack on the central part of Wellington's positions. I've just crossed over the Brussels road and I'm now standing on what was Wellington's left flank. So this is what would have been the sunken lane, and this is where his infantry would have been standing. So around midday, the French artillery opened up and they absolutely hammered the soldiers who were standing here, but they stood firm, and about 1:30 the French launched a large infantry attack. So like the north gate at Hougoumont a couple of hours earlier, this is where the battle started going in Napoleon's favour, because his infantry managed to drive their way through Wellington's lines, and it looked like that Wellington's centre was going to get decimated. But fortunately they had the heavy cavalry, the British heavy cavalry were at the back of the line, and they attacked the French infantry and they managed to drive them back. But unfortunately for the cavalry, they went down too far into the valley. They ended up going right into the French lines, and they suffered heavy losses as a result as well. And there are two memorial stones here. One is to Lieutenant General Sir Thomas Picton. I think he was Wellington's main commander, and he controlled the left flank of the army, and he was killed when he led a infantry attack down here against the French. And there's also a memorial dedicated to the Inniskilling Regiment, and this was put in by the Royal Irish Rangers in 1990. La Papelotte was an important military base on the left flank of Wellington's troops. It was defended by two Nassau regiments, and they were German soldiers originating from the Duchy of Nassau that were integrated into the Dutch army. French troops were almost able to conquer the farm, but they were eventually chased away by the Prussian army. I've moved back to the right flank of where Wellington's army would have been, and it was here around 4 o'clock in the afternoon that another important event took place during the battle. At the time of the battle, Napoleon was a very sick man. He had severe stomach problems, and during the afternoon of the battle he had to stand down for a while, and he put his second in command in charge, Marshal Ney. So around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Wellington decided to move his army back a few metres from the front line of the ridge, I think because of the heavy bombardment from the French artillery. And Marshal Ney was watching this, and he thought that the Wellington's army was actually retreating from the field. So he decided to send in the cavalry, and this was an absolute mistake that he made. He sent them in without any backup from the infantry or the artillery, and so the French cavalry, they came up this hill and they came over this over the ridge, and then when they arrived here, the British army, when they realised that the French cavalry were attacking, they formed square, and this was a military tactic. It was how the infantry could protect themselves against a cavalry attack. So right across this field they would have formed squares, and they would have had their bayonets pointing out so the cavalry couldn't attack them. And this was absolutely fatal for the cavalry, because they couldn't attack the squares, but they were being shot at while they were trying to attack them. So this was a very bad blow for the French army. And around the same time, there was another huge blow for Napoleon, because the Prussian army had started to arrive at the battlefield. Just south of the battlefield, just behind La Belle Alliance, there's a village called Plancenoit, and the Prussian army started to take this village, and so Napoleon had to send some of his reserves to Plancenoit to try and stop the Prussian attack. But then around 6 o'clock in the evening, the French took La Haye Sainte, the farm that was in the centre of Wellington's position. I'm just going to cycle down to the farm now. This is La Haye Sainte farm, which is on the Brussels road, and this is just down a few metres from where Wellington's position on the ridge would have been. And this was the farm was absolutely important for defending his central position. But around 6 o'clock there was a large French attack on the farm, and the French eventually took the farm, and this allowed them to bring up a lot of artillery up to this position. And so from here they could start firing artillery at Wellington's lines at very short distance. And on the wall of La Haye Sainte there are two memorial plaques dedicated to the French soldiers who died taking the farm. And nearby there's also a plaque dedicated to the soldiers who defended La Haye Sainte. I think it was the King's German League, who was part of Wellington's army, who defended La Haye Sainte. So it's at this point that things are starting to look very bad for Wellington, because the French army, they've now advanced up to here with a lot of their artillery. So they're now firing at very short distance into Wellington's front line. But fortunately for Wellington, around 7 o'clock, the Prussian army, they've now taken Plancenoit village, and now they're advancing towards Napoleon's rear guard. So word of this gets to Wellington, and he orders a general attack against the French infantry. I'm back at La Belle Alliance. So in the evening of the battle, the Prussian army would have been coming up this road now, attacking Napoleon from the rear, and Wellington's army would now be coming down across the valley in the other direction. So most of the French army, as it was obvious that Napoleon had lost, they just had to disorderly retreat. They had to just leave the field of battle. But Napoleon's most trusted part of his army was the Old Guard, and they made a last stand, just further down this road, and there's a memorial to them just down there. I'm just going to cycle down there now. I've just cycled down the road from La Belle Alliance, and this is the Wounded Eagle Memorial, and this marks the spot where Napoleon's Imperial Guard made a last stand against the Allies. So this place marks the end of the battle. After the battle, Napoleon was forced to abdicate, and he was sent to live in exile on the island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. And Europe enjoyed 35 years of peace until the Crimean War broke out in 1853. Well, I think this video's starting to get quite long now, so I'm going to upload it tonight and then start my next video when I cycle to Brussels tomorrow. So thank you very much for watching my video, and I hope to upload another one soon. Bye.